Good morning, everyone. We're still waiting for Kevin to join us. We are a bit ahead of time, as you would have noticed, which is very unusual for conferences like this. So we are good at timekeeping now. Welcome to our panel on responsible AI in an interconnected world. As you would have seen how the world is shaping up today, AI systems can cross borders much easier than goods, services, and even people. No tariffs, no non-tariff barriers, no visas. So you can have AI systems run throughout the world. However, the data, the rules, the compute infrastructure is still very national. So the key question of what we will focus on as part of this panel is how do we build trust, safety, and interoperability when the world is moving at very different speeds of AI? With me, we obviously have an exceptional panel which represents the full spectrum of how we operationalize AI at scale to shaping global policy and to building national governance frameworks. And we'll have even more insights as we get Kevin on stage as well. What we'll cover today are a few themes. We are exploring a few thematic areas, as you would have heard since morning. We are going to talk about responsible innovation. We'll talk about cross-border alignment, sovereign AI, which is a hot topic these days, trusted data, and the future of global interoperability. So with that, maybe Vendroy, I'll start with you first. We always talk about how Europe tends to regulate early, Asia pushes innovation forward, and the US just lets the market sort itself out. Do you think we'll ever get to a place where there's real global alignment on trust and governance, or are we just headed towards a fragmented mess?
Thank you very much for the question. I think it's a very interesting one to kickstart the panel discussion. I think one of the biggest challenges we face is that different countries have different ways to govern AI. And there is, of course, different approaches, as what you said. And I guess this makes it difficult for companies because they have to navigate through different approaches and navigate in each market. So this may impact innovation, hinder efficiency. But I think even though as we have different approaches, we want the same thing, which is trustworthy AI. And if we have this common goal of, we want AI to be safe, fair, and transparent, I think we can align globally on certain frameworks and facilitate innovation. I think the question will be then, will we get to interoperability to AI governance? I think it's a long-term vision, and it will take time. But I see that there are already foundations there, and there has been progress. So I'll just give an example of Singapore. We have AI Verify. It's a testing framework that helps companies align or assess their AI system against 11 globally recognized principles. But what we did is that we also mapped the framework to other key international frameworks, such as US NIST, AI Risk Management Framework, ISO 42001, and G7. And we published this mapping as crosswalks. I recently met one company whose global AI governance HQ is in Singapore. And they shared that the crosswalks have helped them to save time and effort because it consolidates the best practices from multiple frameworks. That's first. Second, it actually demonstrates to their senior management that they are not biased against or towards any particular jurisdiction. And I guess this is very helpful for companies operating in key international markets. I think that's first. Second is I do see that international organizations are coming together, such as ISO, OECD, Global Partnership on AI, talking about collaboration, building best practices in AI. So just like 12 hours ago, I was on a panel at OECD's webinar talking about how we can leverage regulatory sandbox to facilitate AI innovation. So I think we do see countries coming together, international organizations as well. So while there are different approaches, I guess sometimes we do need them. As long as we have this common goal, I think the key thing is that we keep the conversation going so that we can work towards building that responsible AI in today's connected world. Yeah.
Thanks, Vendroy. Kevin, welcome to the panel. You missed my awesome introduction and the excuse I made that the clock is running earlier.
So sorry about it. This
No
is
worries,
awkward. Hi.
Just I'll move to you now. First of all, congratulations. You are almost close to what, 3.9 trillion, almost close to 4 trillion valuation as of yesterday. So in a world where, the AI stack, and Google is one of the few companies which covers almost all the aspects of stack, from power, chips, LLM, data centers, all the way to apps. We keep hearing a lot about sovereign AI. And again, the question which I was talking to Vendray as well about fragmented mess. Do you see in a world where do you think countries can build their own capability without cutting themselves off from global supply chains or creating these isolated, islands? And does it actually create a drag on the whole AI adoption?
Well, so I think in my current role, what I do is I spend a lot of time talking to policymakers across the world on AI, on cybersecurity, which is what I cover. And sovereign AI has increasingly become a key policy priority for many policymakers. But what is interesting is that everyone can agree that sovereign AI is important, but if you ask them what exactly does it mean, nobody can agree on what exactly it means. Right? People use the term to mean different things. But basically what we've heard is there are a few key motivations behind sovereign AI. So one is many policymakers, especially in this part of the world, in Asia and maybe in the Middle East, they feel that the large language models of today, whether it's Gemini or whether it's GPT, these models don't really reflect their local languages and cultures, right? Because, and this is a valid concern, because these models are primarily trained on publicly available data, and that data is mostly on the internet. And most of the data on the internet is largely English or other Western language, Western-based languages, right? So if you are a country where your primary language isn't English, you may have these concerns, right? So that's one primary motivation. Another one is when some governments feel like, they want their companies to have a share of this AI pie as well. So this became especially prevalent in the early part of this year when DeepSeek was launched, and many governments thought that, hey, actually it's really easy for a small startup to build a highly capable model. They want to have their own DeepSeek as well, right? And then over the past year, I think what we've seen is increasingly governments are also seeing that they are concerned about being overly reliant on foreign technology companies because of what we've seen in heightened geopolitical tensions. So they want to ensure that they can rely on local providers as well. So different countries have different takes on sovereign AI, and I think what we do as a technology service provider is to see how can we help and enable governments to achieve their sovereign AI goals. Just using Singapore as an example, so I think that Singapore doesn't really use the term sovereign AI, but in some ways they care a lot about the first motivation, which is about preservation of local languages and cultures. Right, so we work very closely with AI Singapore on the Sea Lion project, where basically AI Singapore use open models from different providers, including from Google. They use Gemma, and then they do fine-tuning using 11 data sets from 11 languages across Southeast Asia, then to develop the Sea Lion model, which is then widely adopted by many companies across the region. So that's one great example of how I think when local and global companies come together to collaborate, actually, they can help to achieve a lot of these sovereign AI priorities. I think the danger is what you're probably hinting at, is that when you talk about it at a very high level, which is sovereign AI, the conversation tends to be a little bit politicized, and governments then say that, I want to create my own AI model, I want to develop my own data centers and my semiconductor chips, which is not really a feasible way to move forward. Very, very few countries will have the capabilities and resources to do that. So I think the only feasible path to move forward when it comes to achieving these sovereign AI objectives is really to do it in collaboration with other countries, in collaboration with companies from all across the world.
I think fair point. I think at Access Partnership also one of the things that we are working on is to ensure that there is at least some level of interoperability between governance frameworks, whether at national level, at multinational level, regional bodies, or obviously at multilateral level. And the big challenge with all this fragmented mess is the definition of responsible is very different across different stakeholders, different countries, for example. And one stakeholder, which obviously we can't forget, are shareholders. And maybe, Kevin, I'll come to you. The fact that we heard in the morning, your CEO talked about how Singtel is a big user of AI, and it will be very responsible for AI not to create value. So Singtel obviously applies AI across networks, customer experience, workforce operations. How do you measure business value of these AI initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, in the age of AI, the ability to actually what we call capture values or value realization is actually very important, because AI is costly, right? And without that value discipline, a lot of these costs will be a sunk cost, right? So how do we measure our value? So we look at 3 different dimensions based on the Gartner framework. We look at the first, of course, the common traditional values called ROI, right? Return on investment. These are purely financials. We look at AI initiatives that will bring in either EBIT uplift, either cost reduction, or actually bring in new revenue, right? The other aspect that we measure value is based on ROE. We call it return on employees. This is how we actually provide our employees with the kind of AI tooling so that they can improve their productivity. And it's hard to measure, right, in terms of financial, but we do measure in terms of their AI literacy, AI fluency, as well as staff satisfaction, right? And the last one is what we call return of future. This is about how do we handle that kind of innovation, right? We will place big bet on some of the potential game changer. I think earlier on, my CEO also talked about autonomous network, right? It's something so new that the benefit is actually quite hard to quantify, but it's so very strategic and require investment for the start. So in order to make sure that we actually capture all this, we don't lose out on any of the AI innovation, so we measure this in the 3 different terms.
As we obviously move from 5G to 6G, it will obviously be important how can AI optimize that whole capital expenditure deployment as well.
That's right.
So it's going to be crucial. And there are obviously a lot of studies which have been talked. There was this very quoted one from MIT which said only 5% of all AI pilots are actually making value. And I just read an article yesterday which said 50% of all growth in US GDP this year has been because of AI investments. And it was interesting. It's not necessarily just because of data centers. It's just because people are seeing their stock portfolio go up, their confidence is going up, and they're investing more or they're buying more. So very interesting. Just I'll come back to you. It's a 2-part question based on, as you said, that you are talking to policymakers globally. Is there a regulatory approach, maybe from another region, that you think Asia should definitely avoid? And obviously on the flip side, what's something the rest of the world could actually learn from how things are done here?
Yeah, maybe to go back to Wenrei's earlier point, she presented a very optimistic view about how the world was coming together, which I think I generally agree. But if you'd go back maybe about a year ago, I would say I was a little bit less optimistic about that. About a year ago, I think the EU in particular was really looking at, they were the first jurisdiction in the world to basically pass a law, which is the EU AI Act. And they were very actively trying to implement that because it was already been passed, and they were trying to implement, come up with detailed regulations to implement the act itself. What we saw at that point was that you have a major jurisdiction like the EU very focused on minimizing the risks associated with AI. Then you have the rest of the world, like the US, like in Asia, where they're very focused on maximizing the benefits of AI. How can they encourage more companies to adopt AI. So it's a very different approach, right? But what we saw fundamentally shift earlier this year at the Paris AI Action Summit was the EU realized that with that approach, when they're overly conservative, when they are focused so much on the risk, and actually it ended up having a huge compliance burden on their own companies, and they were missing out on what the benefits of AI can bring. So they did a significant U-turn, a policy U-turn, and they decided that they, in fact, just that they're having ongoing discussions on how can they suspend certain parts of the AI Act. How they even withdrew some proposals because they felt that they wanted to be part of the game and have a slice of the pie as well. So I think increasingly we're seeing different approaches come together. However, the danger is that there's a legacy of the EU AI Act that's hanging over certain jurisdictions. So in some countries in APAC, what we've seen is that they want to come up with their own regulatory frameworks. And what they've done, and we've really seen this, they literally copy and pasted from the EU, but they copied and pasted like very high level points without truly understanding the considerations that the EU had gone through when they passed those laws. The danger of that, and we're seeing that right now, I'll just give some examples. In Korea, they rushed through an act, they have their own AI Act, they rushed through it in December last year. A lot of it was very inspired by the AI Act. But right now, there are huge concerns with how that act in Korea is going to be implemented because even the EU itself, which is the originator of this law, has decided to make a policy U-turn. And then in Korea, policymakers are scratching their head thinking, how are we supposed to implement this? Because if the EU itself is not able to implement it, then what are we going to do, right? So they're caught in this bind. And Korea is not the only country. There are several countries across APAC. So I think the approach, the answer to your question is that it is not that there's any certain approach that we should avoid. The only thing I would say is that if you choose to learn from other countries, make sure you understand the underlying policy considerations behind some of the regulations and laws, and not just copy and paste blindly, because different countries have different considerations, very different political cultures and legal structures. What works in one jurisdiction may not always necessarily work in other jurisdictions, so it's important for policymakers to study things very carefully and truly understand what their policy objectives are, and make sure you apply the right policy instruments to achieve your policy objectives.
And to your point, I think EU is also walking back now with omnibus and everything on the sovereignty issues. Wenru, I'll maybe ask you the same question as well. Given that you are looking at it from a Singapore perspective, what is something that we can teach the world, and what is something we need to avoid?
Thank you so much. I actually really like Chester's perspective and the very practical approach. So maybe I'll add on to this to say that AI transcends borders. And I don't think that any single country has the monopoly of experience, expertise, and all the use cases to cover all the risks associated with AI. And because of this, I think it's very important that the global community, countries come together to work together to identify, to understand, to test and mitigate for the risks that's out there. I guess this is also why in Singapore, what we did recently as part of trying to move also very quickly in this space is that we launched the Global AI Action Sandbox at the Paris Action Summit that Chester just mentioned. And what was the sandbox is that we pair AI deployers with technical testers to test the Gen AI application for risks such as hallucination, data leakage. So through this, companies, AI deployers, they can be more confident in deploying scaling AI. For testers, they can validate their testing approaches, and then with real-world use cases. And for us, what we did is that we can validate our policy guidance with very practical examples, given we went through the whole sandbox experience. And so this has been really useful, and now we have turned the pilot into an ongoing sandbox. So as for fast tech fast-moving or fast-evolving technologies like AI, I think it's therefore important that our regulations or our regulatory approach remain very agile, and to quickly adapt, and to also tap on, sandboxes or regulatory approaches so that we can be nimble. And I think for Singapore particularly, because we are small, I think that's why we can do that. But of course, we also have to learn from other countries, what worked, what didn't, so that, can always inform future approaches.
And thanks for bringing the points about skill. That gives me a good segue to the question I'm going to ask Kevin. The fact that a lot of the focus has been on skilling for AI engineers, but the world is now shifting more towards, as we talk about more AI diffusion, we are shifting more towards AI literacy. We are shifting towards how non-tech employees can also use AI. So Kevin, a question to you would be, how are you building AI capabilities and ensuring that employees can deploy AI responsibly and at scale across the organization?
Yeah, I mean, AI isn't new to Singtel. At Singtel, we've been deploying or using AI in the way we actually operate our networks, as well as the way we actually serve our customers. But largely it was done based on a very siloed type of approach, where every business unit has its own team of data scientists, ways of working, their own toolings to deploy AI, right? And that is actually okay, with classical AI, ML, but with Gen AI and LLMs, this fragmented approach become increasingly, difficult to scale, as well as to guard, So what we've done is that we have to change something. We changed three things. One is the organization structure. We actually formed a centralized business unit called IDA, AI and Data Analytics, that I led, and to centralize all the AI initiatives so that we can have a common approach on how to deploy AI, right? And also all the policies, governance, and all that. And also we have developed a central AI platform, okay, where we actually deploy AI in a consistent manner, in a cost-efficient manner, as well as securely. Because that's where we actually centralize all the central guardrails, on that platform itself. And thirdly, it's on our people, right? You talk about it, how do we actually lift our people AI literacy or masteries, so that they can actually be our citizen of developers, right, to AI. And just recently, we have launched OpenAI ChatGPT Enterprise to all our Singtel employees so that they can actually use and make their work more productive. I think these are the things that we do. Hopefully with this, we are able to unlock AI value faster and really deploy AI at scale in a consistent, cost-efficient, and secure manner.
Based on the two responses you gave about AI value and responsible AI for employees, what I've learned is that fragmentation doesn't work. You need to ensure that there is scale. You need to know, so maybe you can teach the rest of the global governments that we should not be fragmenting our governance frameworks. And Kevin, I'll come back to you on the next question as well. One aspect of responsible AI is obviously safeguarding critical network infrastructure, critical infrastructure overall, right? We all struggle from when our trains don't work, which is like the second biggest source of stress in Singapore after MOE. So AI is obviously increasingly used for critical tasks like network management, optimization, predictive maintenance. If our telco networks don't work, obviously it's a big challenge. Safety failure could lead to major disruptions. How is Singtel managing this? Are you using AI for it, or how are you actually looking at this situation?
Yeah, I mean, just to share, right, I just checked with my networks colleagues. We actually implement like more than 8,000 changes in networks every year, right? And every time you touch the network, touch wood, things can go wrong, right? And we've been using AI as well to look out for that kind of early warning signals, to see anomaly detection, for example, early warning signal to see whether or not there's any issues, and before they escalated into a major incident, we intervened and fixed it. And we even have these ambitions of a target of 1, 5, 10, right? 1 minute to detect the problem, 5 minutes to find out the root cause, and 10 minutes to resolve the problem. So, but that is only possible with the use of AI, right? Humanly, it's just going to be very challenging, right, to do this consistently. But the question is then, how do we actually make sure that it's safe, right? Our approach is we need to have a very strong, robust, human-in-the-loop control, all right? This is where any of the critical decision or risky activities has to be reviewed and approved by a human, right? I mean, AI can do wonders, right? I mean, it can deliver tremendous benefit if you use it correctly, but I think we need to incorporate also the accountability, how AI is being used, and only human can actually provide that. So that's how we manage that.
So did I hear you correctly that you're guaranteeing my network disruption won't last more than 10 minutes? Is that your KPI?
Yeah, that's the target, right? So we are still working through it. Autonomous network is one of the things that will help us to achieve that. We're still working on it.
Thanks, Kevin. Just to move on to you, we talk a lot about responsibility principles. Every country has some way or other has looked at some responsibility principles. Companies have their own responsibility principles. From your experience, what's the one responsibility principles that you have found the hardest to implement, and why? What makes it so tricky?
Maybe let me just build on what Kevin said earlier before I answer that question, which is that it's really great to hear that companies like Singtel, as a critical infrastructure provider, is using AI, right? So what we are seeing, and Google, we just published a report earlier this month about how bad actors are using AI very rapidly to develop very novel capabilities. So in one example that we saw was that this threat actor was using AI to, on an hourly basis, generate malware code. And the reason they were doing this is because they wanted the malware to avoid being detected by antivirus software that typically use static signature-based detection, right? So just earlier this year in January, we published a slightly different report saying that, yes, we see threat actors using AI to perpetuate crimes and malicious activities, but then they were only using it to improve their productivity. They were not using it for novel capabilities. So for instance, they were using it to do research, they were using it to draft emails and all that, but what we saw this month is a significant shift, is that they were using AI to develop these new capabilities that would fundamentally change and tilt the advantage towards the bad actors, right? So I think what's really important is that those of you who are in the security space will know there's this thing called the defender's dilemma, which is that a bad actor only needs to succeed once, but the defender needs to succeed every single time. So in order for companies like Singtel, who are the defenders, who are basically the good guys in the room, in order for them to succeed, they need to be deploying AI much more rapidly than the bad actors are, right? But unfortunately, I don't think that's what we are seeing today. No, I'm not saying Singtel in general, just like defenders in general. I think that because a lot of them are in the highly regulated spaces, they are less willing to adopt technology at a much faster pace. So the answer to your question is that, to me, I'm not sure whether you consider this to be a responsible AI principle, but to me, the one thing that's most difficult is to make sure that AI is used for socially beneficial purposes, which was when Google first came up with our AI principles, that was the number one principle that we had. How do we make sure that AI is applied in a socially beneficial manner? Because AI is a general purpose technology, right? When we put it out there, companies, defenders like Singtel can use it, but threat actors can also be using it. So what are we supposed to do? Do we hold back on the advancements of technology so the bad actors cannot use it? But at the same time, we are then limiting the benefits to society, right? So it's a difficult question that we struggle with, because when we put out technologies, we want to make sure that everyone can have access to it, that it is fully democratized and anyone can use it. But at the same time, we then need to be very mindful of how we are limiting the use and the abuse of our technologies by threat actors to perpetuate malicious activities. And that's something that we struggle with every day, and that's what keeps us up at night every day. And it's not something that I don't think we have an answer at this point, but it really calls for greater collaboration across, regulators, deployers, and technology developers like ourselves. Yeah.
And yeah.
Sorry, can I just comment on the point Justin made? Since he's talking about cybersecurity and all that. So recently we actually come up with an idea on how to fight AI with AI on this space, right? By creating a honeypot, right? Where we want to trap some of these, scam, not malware specifically, but more on the scam calls, right? That is happening in our networks, by creating many AI, virtual customers, right? To actually trap some of these scam calls and then understand their patterns and then develop a solution to block it more effectively. So it just triggered my thoughts to share that we do use AI now to actually fight some of these AI bad actors.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's absolutely the way to go. So in that example that I gave earlier about how we detected threat actors using AI, so we adopted exactly the same approach, which is they were using basically Google's platforms to do these things. We were able, because they are on our platforms, we were able to draw these threat signals from them. We then immediately shut them down, stop them from using our technologies, but then we use all the threat signals that we got from them to harden our model by fine-tuning our model so that in the future, the model will know that these are activities that they should not be processing, right? So at exactly the same point, how can we be turning these threats into opportunities for us to strengthen ourselves and strengthen our cyber defenses? And I think that's absolutely the way to go, which is to use AI to fight AI.
And to both of your points, I think valid points. One of the challenges, obviously, on the socially beneficial use cases is some of those players, whether you are talking about agriculture or healthcare, the jump for them is so high that they are the least protected sort of users from an AI perspective. So they are more prone to some of these things. So that's why it's very crucial to build in some of the defense capabilities within the AI use cases as well. Which brings me to you, Wenru. With AI evolving so quickly, how do you see public-private partnerships help bridge the gap in AI testing and ensuring global alignment?
Well, I think countries can work together, as I earlier shared. So I think it's also important for the industry as well. And I guess Chester also alluded, right, regulators, companies all need to come together. And I think for companies, what they want is to have very clear, consistent rules harmonized across so that it's easier to scale, easier to innovate and comply with regulation. So I guess this is where public-private partnership comes into play as the use of AI becomes more prevalent, for good or for the bad. There are all the risks that will come with it. And we need to make sure that AI is safe, we need to make sure that it's reliable. And to do so, AI testing, I guess, is key. But we cannot test alone. We need to actually work together and bring in experts from the industry, to not only the industry, but also the research community, and we crowdsource all these development efforts. And this is also why we set up AI Verify Foundation, which is a global open source community that promote best practices in AI governance and AI testing assurance. And I think it's over 2 years, the foundation now has more than 220 members, including from Access Partnership, from Singtel, and Google is also the premium member of AI Verify Foundation. So I believe this working together with the industry, with other regulators is extremely important. We need to come together to know what worked, what did not. Otherwise, how are we going to build something that works globally if we do not have all the stakeholders and ecosystems together? And I also call on the larger community, to be part of this responsible AI community and movement, because I believe that everybody, can play a part in this.
Thanks, Wenrui. You had some.
So if I can just give a tangible example of this partnership that Wenrui is talking about, is that I think it was in end August, we announced a partnership with the government, specifically IMDA, CSA, Cybersecurity Agency, and also GovTech in Singapore to come up with a sandbox on AI agents. So everyone talks about agents these days, but if you talk about the truly autonomous agents, these are basically agents that will do things without specific instructions from you, and they're truly autonomous, right? I don't think most of the so-called agent products that we talk about today aren't really truly fully autonomous agents, but at some point, we will likely get there. Right. So in anticipation of that, what we did was that with the 3 Singapore government agencies, we said, why don't we test to see how can we apply this technology to different use cases? How can we identify what are some of the risks associated with arising from this technology, and what are some of the mitigation measures we can put in place? So what we did was that we gave the government early access to our technologies, and then we started building use cases around that. And the reason why I want to raise this is that we are able to do this in Singapore, and we are very privileged to be here in Singapore because the government is willing to be forward-thinking and think few steps ahead. And as Wenrui said, it is a small country. The government can move really fast. If we were to try to do this in some other country, they were like, oh, we need to get approvals, clearance, there's all this bureaucracy. So I think the collaboration between public and private sector is really evident in Singapore, but we don't just do this in Singapore. Once we do this in Singapore, then what we do is we have the framework and the takeaways that we can then apply to other countries and say, hey, we've done this in Singapore before. Would you like to partner us in some other country to do the same thing? So I think that this public-private partnership is really critical to ensure that we can then put safe and responsible and trusted technologies into the hands of users and deployers. And we should try to do this across the world as much as possible.
Thanks, Chester. The benefit of starting early is that I can get in one more question, ask you about your Christmas wish list. Wenrui, from your perspective, what is one thing you think we should prioritize? Transparency, evaluation frameworks, anything from a responsible AI perspective?
AI Verify has 11 principles. You're asking me to pick a favorite child. You can't do that. But on a more serious note, I guess, I think all of it is equally important. Transparency, data provenance, governance. But I think what ultimately matters is you need to prioritize the context and the use case. So as regulators, policymakers, we can lay out the principles, we can lay out the frameworks, consideration. Ultimately, how companies prioritize depends, it may be a commercial decision or commercial interest based on the risks and the context. So say if I'm using AI for autonomous vehicles, transparency might be the top of my list. But if I'm a bank and I am wanting to use AI for anti-money laundering efforts, the last thing I want to do is to tell the money launderer I'm using AI to catch you. So I guess, while I'll say all of these are equally important, so sorry, but we really need to see, and we trust that companies make that decision on the use case and the risk involved.
There's always a favorite child, I told you. Chester, what about you? Christmas wish list?
I think all these principles that we talk about, whether it's transparency, explainability, privacy, security, all these are really important. But ultimately, I think the biggest risk that we face is not about the misuse of AI, but the misuse of AI. And I think what I mean by that is that I think the risk is not whether we don't have human in the loop, whether we don't provide enough information about our models, or whether it's not secure. It is if we are overly conservative because we're so focused on the risks of AI that we forsake the potential benefits of AI. That is the biggest risk, and that is a huge disservice we're doing to society by depriving them of full access to this transformational technology. So I would say that the biggest risk is really about the misusers of AI, such that we are not able to harness and unlock the true potential of AI. And I think that's something that policymakers should actively think about. How can we truly enable the broad segments of society to be fully utilizing AI?
Yeah, I think that it's a fair point, because outside the tech world, you always have very balanced views. If there was no fire and you would not have the risk of fire getting out of the proportion, you would all be eating raw food. And that's why we have fire departments, SCDFs, so to manage some of those risks as well. So it's a fair point. Kevin, you have any wish list?
Yeah, I mean, my priorities in Singtel is to basically drive AI, embedding AI in all our business operations, including networks and IT, and really position Singtel as the AI-first telco of the future. And we need to do this in a secure and responsible way. I mean, that's the key priority now.
It's a festival period. So as Thanksgiving is coming, I would like to thank all of our panelists for an incredibly rich discussion. If there's one message, obviously, I take back from this is that responsibility is no longer just a policy concept. It's now an operating model for all the way we are building the world. We need, obviously, interoperability that respects cultural differences, sovereign capabilities, that doesn't isolate economies. We don't have a fragmented world. We have shared norms that allow AI to be both innovative and trusted. And in such a world, responsible AI is no longer just a compliance exercise. It's become a competitive advantage. I would like to thank all of you for being so patient, and thank you all as well for your rich insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.